Tom Kersting, thanks for joining today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Really excited to hear from you. Can you start by introducing yourself and your work to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tom Kersting. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I have a private practice up here in New Jersey. I'm the author of two best-selling books, um, Disconnected, How to Protect Your Kids from the Harmful Effects of Device Dependency, and Raising Healthy Teenagers. And I lecture, throughout the country to parents and schools and so forth on screen time and something I call mental wealth.
Give us a rundown of each of those books, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so disconnected. So I may be one of the first pioneers in this territory. We hear about screens and mental health among teenagers, and sucking up all their time, affecting them academically. I actually started lecturing on this topic in 2009. So I think that's about 17 years ago. I worked in
That's
a high.
really early on.
Yeah, so the book really goes deep into the psychological impact of too much screen time, brain neuroplasticity, social implications, the family issues, developmental issues, all of the above, and then provide strategies and tips. A lot of research in that book.
Well, 2009 though, that's even before or around the time that Jonathan Haidt says is the beginning of the crisis. So
Oh yeah,
well,
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah, he's I've spoken with him online and so forth. Yeah, so his new book, The Anxious Generation. I saw it and I was jealous because because his book, I'm jealous because his book was the number one Times New York bestseller, which is the creme de la creme. And this is the stuff that I read his book. It's a lot of stuff I've been talking about for many, many years. But he's a great researcher, great professor at NYU, and we definitely have a lot in common. In 2012, around that year is when the mental health epidemic among kids really began to escalate, and that's consistent with when smartphones became mainstream.
so what are the main arguments in the book Disconnected?
Well, I start off by talking about something called acquired attention deficit disorder, which is not an official term. So the reason I got into this was I was working in a high school back in, from 95 until 5 years ago. And around 2008, we started to get an influx of students that were teenagers being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And what a lot of people don't realize is that ADHD is a neurological condition you're born with. And the average age of diagnosis is 8 years old. And if you have a child with ADHD, by the time your child's 5, you can't not notice the symptoms. So here we're in this committee I had called the 504 committee. We were fielding, every week a new 14-year-old recently diagnosed with ADHD, and we'd never seen that previously. So that's what led me to the research. I came across some research by a renowned physician named Gary Small, and one of the researchers on his team coined a term that he referred to as acquired attention deficit disorder. And what he meant by that is that they estimated that roughly 70% of kids that are, older, like 13, 14, 15, that are diagnosed with ADHD likely don't have ADHD. They have the symptoms of it. What they have is a brain instead that has been so used to being stimulated 8 hours a day, constant stimulation from screen time, that when a kid sits in the classroom, that brain is all over the place trying to find that stimulation, and therefore it affects the executive functioning part of the brain, which is necessary to focus and retain information. So that's how I got into it. And then the book goes into something I call acquired anxiety disorder, and just so much, just tech neck, all these other things.
Okay, well, that distinction between acquired versus, I don't know what you'd call it, natural ADHD, that's really helpful because you're saying that it is possible that ADHD is a legitimate diagnosis, but most of what people call ADHD now is just a matter of how they've been trained due to what they've been exposed to for many hours a day for years.
Yeah, and again, so like ADHD it's not something you get. So when I hear adult ADHD, right? Oh, I got ADHD when I was an adult. That's not how it works. Now you can have the symptoms, go to a doctor and get prescribed a medication. And, you look at big pharma and they ran out of Adderall a couple of years ago. So then, they're not likely to come back and say, hey, wait, maybe these people don't have ADHD, but they could treat the symptoms of it. Whereas what I tell parents, if I get a call to my office and a parent tells me that their 15-year-old recently started demonstrating symptoms of ADHD, what I tell them is, as best you can, try to disconnect and unplug them for about 30 days and see what happens. And likely the executive functioning part of the brain is going to return to action.
How many parents have you worked with who have actually done that 30-day screen fast?
Very little, very little, because it's much easier said than done. I understand that, if there's another element here too, Johan. So in my recent book, Raising Healthy Teenagers, I talk about oppositional defiant disorder. All right, and what that is a kid, teenager, even younger, that's just defiant and oppositional to an authoritative figure, namely the parent. And that has begun to really escalate in recent years in my anecdotal professional, experience. And every time so if I tell a parent
Well, it didn't
disconnect,
even exist a few years ago, so it
well, it
definitely
has. I
exists.
mean, it's been around, but you don't really hear much about it. Oppositional defiant disorder. Um, so, if a parent were to take their kid's phone away, even for a day or two, or their Xbox, they're going to exhibit oppositional defiant behavior. I've had parents come into my office, call me, tell me their 11 or 12-year-old, curses at them, punches holes in the walls, gets physical with mom, and the common denominator in every one of those cases is that the parent has removed the stimuli, either the phone or the Xbox or whatever it might be. And the reason for that has to do with dopamine. All those things target the pleasure seeking part of the brain. So kids are literally walking around with an endless IV drip all day long. And when a stimuli is removed, there's a crash and a withdrawal, just like if you took drugs away from a drug addict. But the mind is craving that dopamine. And the crash and withdrawal manifests itself, behaviorally, physically, verbally, all of the above.
So what should a parent do in that situation?
Deal with it.
Yes, yes.
Deal with it
Oh
because
my gosh!
you know,
Finally,
you
some sanity.
I mean, we got a parent here, but that's the reason why parents don't do
Oh my
it.
gosh, this is so surreal talking to someone who has common sense. And you're a therapist? Is you're a psychotherapist? I can't believe this.
Yeah, I'm licensed. Yeah. So I mean, in all seriousness, that's the only thing you can do. Like if you have a kid that is constantly on their screen and then you all of a sudden remove it from them for a day or two or whatever, they are going to freak out. And that's the reason why a lot of parents don't do that. So if a parent were to commit, to say, all right, we're doing this for 90 days, Johnny's going to have a meltdown like you've never seen before for the first couple of days. It's going to be nasty for the first week, still a little bit nasty week 2. And by week 3, Johnny's likely to all of a sudden starting to return back to planet Earth. And by week 4, your Johnny may be back.
So have you actually experienced that? Have you seen that happen?
Oh yeah, many many times, sure, yeah.
Okay, so the parents just have to stay firm with this. Would be no screens. Would that be the intervention here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the intervention, the starting point would be to gravely reduce screens. So, like I'm going to be giving a lecture tonight to 100 something parents and community members at a school. And, the number one most important tip that I'm going to give to the parents is that your child's phone should never, ever be in the bedroom with them at night, period. So that right there is a really good starting point. I give an example in my book and at my lecture I'm going to give tonight, that when I was working in the high school before I retired 5 years ago, that final year, I asked a question to 100 students. I did a little survey. And these were all kids that knew me and trusted me. So it was sort of like over the course of a school year, a kid would show up at my office and I said to them, listen, I have a question I'm going to ask you. Just answer it honestly. It's not going to leave this room. I'm not going to call your parents. And the question I asked them was the following: what time do you go to sleep on school nights? And 92 or 93 of the 100 students told me that they went to sleep between 1 and 4 a.m. every night of the school week, and their parents had no idea. And that's because the phone's in the bedroom. So as a result, what your listeners might not know is we have a sleep deprivation epidemic in America right now among teenagers. Sleep centers are bursting at the seams. And just that alone, you take a tired and exhausted young person, that is a non-functioning human being. They can't learn optimally. They can't be in a good mood. They can't form relationships. They can't have a solid relationship at home with their family. So that's a non-negotiable tool that I give to parents.
Well, sleep is the number one factor for physical and mental well-being.
No question. No question.
Okay, so one thing when I give kind of similar talks, I would be curious actually to hear one of your talks to see how we are similar or differ. But my takeaway at the end is, first of all, I'd say, look, the solution is no smartphones. Never give your kid a smartphone. There's no reason to. And then even things like other toxic forms of screen use, like social media and video games. That's just not going to help your kid. It's not going to do more good than harm. But what are the challenges to following through on that plan? So in my experience, it's anxious moms and weak men. Like that's why they don't follow through on the plan. It's not that they don't know what to do. I could get into that. I could explain that more, but I wonder if you have any initial reactions to that.
I like that. So the anxious mom part, right? So, you know, I'm a big advocate of phones not being allowed in schools. Period. We're seeing some movements with that, and I know Jonathan Haidt is big on that as well. So when I bring that up at a lecture, and when we get to the Q&A, there's always the question, well, what if there's an emergency? You know what I mean? So the fear that you refer to, anxiety.
Yeah.
So parents have become it's become the umbilical cord. That phone is the umbilical cord between child and parent, right? So the fear that's sort of festering in all of our minds is not necessarily based on any reality. It's based on what we see. So everything's caught on camera, right? Nowadays, there's a camera in everybody's pocket, on every street corner. Parents are afraid of a kidnapping. Even that right there, you hear, I see this when I'm, in the morning, parents in their SUVs with their 12-year-old in the passenger seat when it's 75 and sunny out, and I know they live 3 houses down. They're afraid to let their kid walk. Because I know what they're thinking because they're afraid of kidnapping, right? So why would they be afraid of kidnapping? What people don't realize is that kidnapping is at an all-time historic low and has been for many years. The difference is if there is a kidnapping in the middle of rural Kansas, you and I now know about it. It funnels right to our whatever we're looking at, whatever screen, and we immediately see that. Our brain soaks that in, right? And we have this idea that there's probably kidnappers floating around here, and we create this sort of mass hysteria, which is what our society is sort of bundled up in right now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that hysteria, that anxiety gets transferred to our kids, right? So it's very contagious. So you look at the anxious epidemic, anxiety epidemic among kids, it's a lot of that and more. And as far as the weak dads, I'm an old school blue collar guy, right? My dad was a Vietnam veteran, but a real humble Catholic man, police officer, Irish Catholic family. So I came from a real strong Catholic, Irish Catholic family. And, I had a strong male role model. And, my dad used to say to us, if we would, be saying, come on, let me do this, let me do that, blah, 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 you don't trust me. He would say, God didn't give you to me for me to trust you. He gave you to me for you to trust me. So I always say too, Johan, that the number one word in the parental vocabulary has to be the word no.
Dude, you're a real man. I mean, it's just so refreshing talking to someone who's
Yeah.
actually a man.
Well, it's just, I have kids, they're older. My son's 21, my daughter's 18, and there's no shortage of love being thrown around, but there's accountability, right? If they break the rules, there's accountability. And, you want to get to a point as a parent where that if your kid does something wrong, and they will, and you find out that they feel bad, and they feel bad because they let you down, the parent.
Yeah. Any other gems in the teenager book that you wrote?
Raising healthy teenagers. Yeah, God, I got so many. I have it in front of me right here. Let me see what we got. So I want to talk to you about something very important. So, we hear all over about this stuff now, screen time and, the epidemic among kids. So one thing that nobody's really talking about, except for me, I believe, is, I call, the smartphones the modern day weapons of mass distraction. Okay. People are distracted all day long. But here's something I've been, pumping into my lectures for a couple of years now, is that what our children, us adults included, but let's focus on the children, our kids, what they're ultimately distracted from is self. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Self.
Leisure and contemplation.
So you would love this. So if you were there tonight, if I were speaking to kids tonight, I get to this part in my lecture called cyber self-esteem. And I'll ask a kid in the front row, I'll say, who are you? And I know what their response is going to be. It's predictable 100% of the time. They tell me their name. I say, hi, John, how are you? And I go to the next kid, hey, Susie, and hey, Paul. And then I ask one of them to ask me who I am. And they say, who are you? And my response is, I am not Tom Kersting. And then I pause and they look at me like I'm crazy. And I go on and say, That's just the name my parents gave me. Now, let me tell you who I am. Who I am is a loving, joyful, caring, spiritual, powerful human being. And then all the kids look at me like I have two heads again. And the reason why I share that is I explain to them that every single kid in this room that I'm speaking to is every one of those things and more, but they can't know it because they never tune into self. They're always tuned out from self. Kids today are constantly, almost constantly on a device, right? So they never get to know the true nature of self, which is the rest of the iceberg. They're living in the 10%, the external world, the feedback, the likes, the streaks, the followers, the photos, the Instagram, the TikTok. They never pause and learn how to delve inward. So I teach them how to do that for like 5 minutes a day. It's something called attitude of gratitude. You just pause. It's a good starting point, and just, for 4 or 5 minutes, just take inventory of everything that we're grateful for. And I predict that if every kid in the country was to do just that every day for a month or two, that the mental health epidemic would go down by 80% just from doing that. And that's only the tip of the iceberg of the depth of the rest of the iceberg.
Are we doomed? Or at least is this generation doomed, the young generation?
I don't like to think, I don't want to believe that they're doomed, but I think, this generation has been, greatly stunted. I was looking at some article today. I didn't read the article, but, like this generation of young men, testosterone is down 50% compared to, the same age men in the 1950s. And I think a lot of this plays into it because there's less, there's a lot of young men now that are literally going on OnlyFans, and that's their relationship with women. And they have no interest in forming relationships with women, whether it's emotional or sexual. And that's a problem. And, you look at
They're addicted to pornography, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And they
Yeah.
haven't really developed the ability of what it takes to approach a young lady, and the confidence that's necessary for that, because socializing is a skill that's not something you're born with, something you develop and get better at by use. And when we look at this generation, that's there's very little face-to-face interaction compared to previous generations, and it just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, another objection I get from the anxious moms is, "Hey, my kid's not going to have any friends if they don't have a smartphone." And the way I think about it is, if you need social media to have friends, you're a loser, and you just don't have friends to begin with. And those people are not your friends.
Yeah, I know. And it is difficult because, you look at, like, for example, I talk about this in Raising Healthy Teenagers. Play, outdoor play is down 70% in recent years, right? And every time a child goes outside and plays, young kids, it activates something like 1,000 genes in the cortex part of the brain, which is what shapes them socially, right? So, starting at a young age, you got here's a perfect example. My gym partner, this guy I met about a month ago, we work out together every day. Great guy. He's a few years younger than me, but he's got a real young child. He has a 2.5-year-old daughter. His mother-in-law is in from Russia. His wife is originally from Russia, so she's been here for like 4 or 5 months. She's going back in the middle of April, and we meet at the gym at 7:45 a.m. every day. So he was telling me last week that what he's going to do is bring his daughter. They have like a child care area, like, for with babysitters and stuff at my gym. And he's terrified of doing that. And I explained to him, I said, that is the best possible thing for your daughter, to have her interacting starting at this age with kids that are her age, maybe even a little older. That's how you develop, if somebody takes the doll or the ball away from her and she cries, that's how you develop, the ability to overcome adversities, right? If she falls and scrapes her knee, that's how you develop the ability to overcome things like that. So that stuff right there is critically important. Starting at a young age, making sure our kids are interacting and playing, particularly outside, with other kids.
Exactly. Man, we need to go on a speaking tour together.
Yeah, yeah. You do the same stuff, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I love. I mean, I've gotten just more and more raw and authentic, and uh, just really speaking my mind, and more. What do you call it? I would say strict in terms of, yeah, just never give your kid a smartphone, just based on my experience and also reading the research. But I think I found that, at least the audiences I speak to, the parents actually, most of them really appreciate it because no one else is saying it. They're not
Yeah,
hearing this message.
but it is a reality. Like if it's kind of a reality. So for the parent, if your child is like the last one that doesn't have a smartphone, the average age now is like 10 and a half when kids get smartphones. What I used to do at my lectures, Johan, I don't do this anymore, so I don't want to put people on the spot. I used to say, raise your hand to the audience. Let's say there's 100 parents. I'd say, raise your hand if you think it's smart for an 11-year-old to have a smartphone.
Oh my gosh.
Never once has anybody ever raised their hand. And then I say, okay, we all agree that it's a bad idea. Yeah. Well, what would you do if I told you that the average age of first smartphone issuance is 10 and a half? And even though all of us agree it's a bad idea, the majority of us in this room have gotten one for our kid, even though we know it's a bad idea. It's a form of social conformity.
Yeah. Yeah, man. How do we help the parents? Because again, it's not a matter of information. Like there's if you're an anxious mom, like you need help to know how do you process negative emotions, which is a skill that you can learn, and that's what I specialize in.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. So one other thing to that point, so what I write about in the book and what I talk about is starting a new social conformity. Yeah, I call it the phone-free school pledge, right? So
Nice.
imagine like a kindergarten parent, right? And they get the first time they get that packet of stuff, information from the school over the summer, all the forms you got to fill out, and right in there is a form, a pledge that says, "I agree not to purchase a smartphone for my child until late adolescence." Right? I'm betting that any parent that has a kindergarten is going to look at that and say, "Yeah, duh, that makes sense." And then they're going to talk to their friends in the community and say, "Did you get that form? I got it. You going to sign it? Yeah, 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 yeah." So starting then, you could start a whole new type of conformity. Because if all of a sudden you had a group in a community where all of the parents are on the same page and then they go through first, second, third, right through middle school, and the majority of kids still don't have smartphones, guess what? Kids don't want stuff that nobody else has. They only want stuff that everybody has.
Yeah, I think ideas like that are really interesting. Um, Anyways, I want to move towards more of a entrepreneurial phase now. So I'd just be curious. Okay, you're a psychotherapist. You wrote two books. How did that happen? What was that process like?
Oh, that goes way back. So what happened for me is I had done this doctoral program in clinical hypnotherapy, right? So I have it doesn't count. It's not recognized. So it's not what's the word? It's not it's considered holistic and alternative.
Correct. It's not like accredited by the APA or something like
Right,
that.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't use the doctor term because it's in violation of the bylaws with my professional license, which is at my master's level. So, but anyway, I have this doctoral degree in clinical hypnotherapy, and I use a lot of hypnosis
Wow.
as a supplement in my office. It's phenomenal. So I had to do a dissertation, and there were two formats. I could have done a research or manuscript. So I decided, I've always wanted to write a book. So at that time, back in 2000, I don't know when it was, 2003. I was seeing a lot of people helping them lose weight, through hypnosis, which is a whole nother podcast. So, so I wrote a whole manuscript, a book format, and then, it was approved and all that for the, I defended myself in the dissertation. Then I had to learn about the publishing industry, right? So, so I'm the kind of person where if somebody says you can't do this, I'm going to say yes, I can. Because whether you think you can or think you can't, either way, you're right, according to Henry Ford. So I started really pursuing. I wrote a whole book proposal. I got an agent that was interested, et cetera, et cetera. And I couldn't get anywhere with it because in nonfiction publishing, to get a traditional publisher, you have to have a platform, like a million people on social media, TV stuff. So I kept pitching it and pitching it and pitching it, got rejected a million times, almost gave up. Then I reminded myself that Tom Kersting doesn't quit. So I kept pursuing and pursuing, and a small publisher in Washington was interested, and they went for it. And they published that book back in 2008 called um, Losing Weight When Diets Fail. They hired, because they were a small publisher, they didn't have their own in-house, PR and publicity. So they hired an outside agency. So then they started, first time I ever did any media, they had me on radio, blah, blah, blah. Then they had me go film something in New York City, a taped thing that might or may not have been used. And the woman with the camera afterwards says to me, she goes, have you ever done any TV before? And I'm like, no, why? And she goes, because you're a natural on camera. And I'm like, I am? Right. And I came to realize what that was. And it was just me being me. And then at that point is when I started getting a lot, some, media interest and going on TV, and I haven't stopped. And I've been on national TV hundreds of times. Today's Show, Fox, Tucker Carlson when he was on, Jesse Waters, all of them. And then I kind of built a platform for myself. You know what I mean? And I started doing the lectures. So I had a platform. I go on TV, I do podcasts, I do this and that. And that's what led to the most recent 2 books that I wrote, which is with a very big publisher called Baker Books. Yeah. And that's
So
kind of
where did you get the time to devote to writing a book? Because those are most recent 2 books. Because that takes a lot of time.
you got to make the time. You got to do it. So you have with nonfiction publishing, they have a whole team that has to approve the concept first. So you have to have a whole concept of what the book's going to be about, what the chapters are going to be, which will change. Everything changes. And once it gets approved, then you have, 3, it's like building a house. You put the foundation together, put up the frame, then you start plugging in the content with each chapter. And you have, I think it may be a 6-month deadline. So basically what I did for that 6 months is every single Friday, I don't have office hours on Fridays. So I literally was up in my office in my house for all day long, just writing. Yeah. So you got to make the time. It's a pain in the butt, honestly.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to a young solopreneur like myself who's speaking, has a private therapy practice, has a blog, interviewing people on podcasts? How would I build the audience?
Yeah, well, you have to be, number one, you have to be confident with yourself, right? No doubt about it. Know your material. Know there's always going to be a few puddles in the path. It's not like, boom, I'm going to do this and it's going to, explode. It takes time. It takes time. I always say that, success, whatever one's definition of success is, comes down to 2 things that have to have symmetry, and that is patience and persistence. You have to be patient, but you have to continue to persist.
So there's one thing you said earlier in this conversation that Tom Kersting is spiritual. So what do you mean by that? And what is the underlying motivations that drive you in your work?
So there's, so I am very spiritual. I'm a practicing Catholic too. I go to church and all that. So, the thing that has always stuck with me is in the Bible, not to get all religious with people, it's just my belief. There's a quote in the Bible. It says, nearer is he than breathing, closer than hands and feet. So what that means is that God, whatever, if you believe in God, whoever your God is, if you're just present, if you take just a breath of air right now and just, think about that, God is in your presence, right? And I believe that that's, a guiding light towards everything. It's something that's really a missing ingredient in our society, in fact. I talk about that in raising healthy teenagers too. But, for me, that works. I could sit here and tell you crazy stories, from that being guided and, kind of mind-boggling stuff.
Wow. Okay.
Because we are, what are we? If Jack Canfield, the former, Chicken Soup for the Soul, not Jack Canfield, and I can't think of the guy's name, but he died like 5 years ago. But he would say that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
I like that. So you've accomplished a lot already. Where are you going with this? What's your vision?
So my vision is to keep pounding the pavement, doing what I'm doing tonight. Go do another lecture, reach as many people as I can. Continue to do, use TV because they call me on when there's always headline stories about screen time, mental health among kids. I continue to get my message out there. And as I've been doing this for many years, and I've kind of pivoted a little bit, to the point where, it's not just all about screen time. It's really about helping people find a new frequency within. Right? It's there. We just have to find it. We just got to tune into ourselves. All of our resources lie within us. Joy, all that, like I mentioned earlier, joy, happiness, power, motivation, confidence. We can't be just floating around subconsciously all day and access that stuff because none of that is outside in, it's inside out. So I've been really at my private practice, really teaching people, some very effective strategies on how to tune into that and like literally hyper, psych yourself from the inside out. Right. And the mind, whatever you're feeling from the inside, the mind and emotions are parallel, right? I always say that an emotion is a symptom of thought, right? Whatever, you can't be thinking negatively and be feeling positively, and you can't be thinking positively and be feeling negatively. So if we tune in and just unearth great feelings, our mind has to be aligned with that. And the more we do that, the more we're just going about our day with that as just a spiritual, powerful, energetic, magnetic being.
What would you need to 10x your impact?
Um, to learn how to use social media better. Which I'm currently working on. That's not my forte. Like I get people reaching out to me all the time. Like, you got so much content. We could get this out there, but you got to pay us $5,000 a month, this and that. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, that's what I would need to do. But again, social media. Like I'm not against social media. Even for me, like Facebook, I have Facebook, but it serves two purposes. It's just a platform where I could share with people things that I've done professionally or that I have coming up, like lectures, TV appearances, other studies I see. And it's also my psychology laboratory where I get to study people's comments and behaviors and watch how they unravel over disagreements with other people. um, and I don't share anything personal. Like if I'm away on some nice vacation, I'm not sitting there posting and saying, look at me here in Hawaii, everybody, I'm great. Because very centered person. I really work hard at not allowing external stuff to have any impact on me internally.
Okay. So it wouldn't be contrary to your mission to use like Facebook, Instagram for professional
Well,
purposes.
if I'm using it for professionally to be able to reach people, I think it would be a good thing. If I was using it because I was seeking attention and validation, then I'd be kind of hypocritically, preaching to people about stuff that they shouldn't do, but I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a question in the back of my mind. I mean, I'm similar to you, but then more recently, I'm just thinking like, to what extent is it just material cooperation and evil to like things like Instagram that lead people into pornography, that I think intentionally, like the feed is populated by just uh, images that are actually advertising pornographic websites. So, anyways, it's just a debate I'm struggling with right now. Like, is it better just to burn the ship and find a different
Even
marketing?
like, you look at all the anger and the violence and all that stuff going out there. And I think part of the reason why there's so much more of that is because everything's captured on camera, and everything funnels to what I call the armpit, the tailpipe of the mainstream media, and that's social media. So kids are absorbing all these bad things all day long, and what's going to happen? Your mind becomes desensitized to that over time. It almost becomes normal.
Yeah, yeah, and then they can get started on addiction at a very young age.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, this was real, man. Do you have any last thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I always have some good nuggets. Yeah, I do have a good thought, all right, for your audience, and this is that it doesn't have to be about your kids or anything, just about you. Seek silence on a daily basis. Seek silence. Doesn't have to be forever, but if you can pull off 5 minutes of silence, when I mean silence, I don't mean just like letting your mind wander. I'm talking about tuning into yourself, focusing on a breath of air, thinking about what you're grateful for, visualizing what you desire. You start getting to know that place, then all the external stuff that's going on is not going to have any impact on you.
Nearer is he than breathing, closer than hands and feet. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. It's great talking to you, man.